Hi, my name is John Gabriel. I'm an interviewer with the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County, and today I'm interviewing Hugh Daly. Today is the 14th of December, 2006, and we're at the main library downtown Cincinnati. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Daly.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about where you grew up.
I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, in a little town called Rosendale, about 12 miles from the center of town. It's referred to as the suburb.
Very nice. Prior to the war, well, how long were the war broke out?
I would have been 19-ish.
19.
Yeah.
Do you remember where you were in Pearl Harbor was bombed?
Yes, I do.
Where were you?
Well, I was a first semester sophomore at Boston College, and I had a job, weekend job. And I was working in the South Station. I worked in the back of a big restaurant set up in the South Station, which was the major railroad terminal and very busy in those days. And the word came of the invasion, of the attack, and it was radio that we were hearing in those days. And then, I forget, it must have been kind of maybe early afternoon that started, and then progressively they were filming, amplification of what was happening. So anyhow, that's where it was. One thing about the place was that on a Sunday, we had all these early people that had been drawn into the service were heading back to Camp Edwards, which is down on Cape Cod. They got the train there. So there was a lot of military action. That was when the big song was, Dear Mom, I'll be back in a year, and they were directing people in for a year. So there was huge, big crowds of soldiers saying goodbye to their loved ones, heading back to what for them was a very, very bad place to be, which for us New Englanders, it was beautiful Cape Cod.
From that point on, when did you begin your military experience?
Well, I was continuing in my second semester. That was December, Pearl Harbor. And then we had mid-years, and I was back in my second semester. And I think, like many, we gradually were kind of losing interest in school. I came from really kind of an anti-military family, the Irish anti-British uniform family, and we had a Friday day where we had a 3-hour break between classes, and one of our guys very much wanted to be in the Navy Aviation Cadet Program. So he and myself and one other guy, we headed downtown from Boston College's out a little bit. And in order to be interviewed by the Navy, you had to go to crosstown to the North Station, which was the other terminal. And I was afraid we were going to miss the change of prices at noon at the theater that we were heading. So I convinced him we'd go to the Army, which was on the south side. Well, anyhow, it turns out he was just a month or so under 18, so he was too young to enlist. The other guy was a all-state football player, but they had bad knees. So they kind of looked at me and said, what about you? So anyhow, that led to me with my mother springing for a deviated septum correction. I found myself in the Army Aviation Program. It took a while before, it all went through. And then I know the day, we were on a spring break, Patriots Day, the Marathon Day up in Boston, and the opening of the baseball season, which is April the 19th. I had headed down to the Cape hitchhiking with one, but we had a big group going to stay at a cottage of one of the families. And I got there, and everybody was saying the state police are looking for you. So anyhow, it turned out they wanted me for enlistment the next morning, or for signing. So I headed back on a train and got sworn in on April the 20th of 42. And so then I was supposed to go to Nashville, Tennessee, which was the classification center for the aviation cadets. Except it wasn't quite ready, so they put me on a 90-day furlough. And that night I was back on the Cape, and we had all these soldiers from Camp Edwards, and my friends were kind of, which they had a thing to do, were kind of writing them and saying I was in the military. And for them to see a 90-day furlough paper was really something. But anyhow, that would have been April, so it was May, June, July, somewhere like August, I headed, and I got down to Nashville. Am I going into 2 months?
No.
Okay.
By no means, you're doing a great job.
And then I went through this intensive couple of weeks of testing, physical, emotional, intellectual, etc. And I washed out because of what do you call it, depth perception. And so then, which broke my heart. I said, why did they do this? Why didn't they find that out when I was up in Boston before I signed in? So anyhow, they were very kind to me, and it went before boards, and they offered me everything, and they worked real hard. Why don't you go to OCS? And I really didn't have a military mentality, and I didn't know much about it. And I kept insisting I wanted to be an aerial gunner, which was kind of stupid in that you need even better eyesight for that. But anyhow, they sent me to a place called Smyrna, Tennessee. It's about 20 miles outside of Nashville. And it's famous now because Saturn has a big automobile factory in Murfreesboro, which is next to it. And anyhow, I went there and then waited to be re-examined, but then they assigned me to a hangar. The big airplane then was the B-24. It was a big 4-engine bomber, and then the B-17, which was a more sophisticated bomber. And the pilots and navigators and bombardiers would finish at their individual stations and get their wings. Then they'd send them there to work as a crew together and for several weeks, and then they would, on graduation, they'd dip the field and fly off to England. So anyhow, I took the physical again, I flunked that, so they gave me the assignment of a MOS, military occupational specialty, of armorer, which is an expert on guns and ammunition, which I certainly was not before that, and I really wasn't after that. But anyhow, these bombers would come in periodically for their checkups, you know, and they'd come in, and we kind of lived in a hangar in a little room, and then everyone would swarm out over the plane, propeller experts, wheel experts, and do the thing. I was the gun expert. Well, all the guns there were 50 caliber machine guns, and some of the small planes had cannons in their nose. And I guess the thing was, these planes were set to fly over the Atlantic, and they were all in this grease, so you really couldn't take them apart. So all I did really was count them. But anyhow, I did have a job that was a little more exciting. These bombardiers and pilots, they're all second lieutenants. I became their instructor on small arms, and so we'd get in a barracks on the second floor with blankets, and I would teach them about the Colt 45, which is a handgun, and the Thompson submachine gun. And so I studied, and I this is such and such, weighs so many pounds, is so long, then showing the safeties and how to fire, and then we'd take it apart and teach them to put it back together again. So that was kind of a fun job.
Yeah.
So again, I'm a private, okay? So I got hooked on every Air Force base then, on payday, had the day room became a gambling casino. And when I left Nashville on my way to Smyrna, I got my first pay, which was a pay from October back to April. Now, in those days, it was a lot of money for the day, except the first 3 months I was in, Army pay was $21 a month. And there was a song about 21, back then it was $21. And then in June of 1942, they raised it to $50. So whatever that all added up to, I hit this post. And I went to the day room, and again, it was mid-month. And so the big action was around payday. So I was big man on the campus with this roll of money. But suddenly I had side bets going, and it was dice. And I really, other than penny ante poker with my crowd every Sunday night, I really wasn't that knowledgeable. Anyhow, I suddenly was broke.
Oh no!
Now payday came, and I was heading cross post to go to confession. And what do you do when you're broke, you know? And the sergeant asked me, I was going by the PX, but I picked him up a milkshake and a couple of Hershey bars. He gave me a couple of dollars and said, get something for yourself. Anyhow, on the way back, I dropped into this day room, and I had a little bit of change for him. And I got in a loser's penny or nickel match cards, high card win. And I just seen I couldn't lose. The next thing I had $5 or $10. So I went to the dice and stood behind a guy, and I kept putting $1 down period. And I was lucky, so he was real happy because I won, he won. And so he said, next time I get the dice, I'm going to have you be the roller, which I did, and I couldn't lose. I ended up maybe 11 o'clock at night with these 3 crusty sergeants invited me to their room. They had private rooms for a little poker game, which I went, but then, again, it was after midnight. I decided I was Lucky Pierre in the middle of the way, they just seemed to be. I had for those days. And I had enough that on that Monday I sent $300 home, which, well, nowadays it's zilch, but anyhow, that was big dough. And many times got it back from my mother. But I became a gambler, and I made a bet on Boston College was red-hot football that year, which is my idea school. And the Chicago Tribune said the only team that could give them a battle was the Chicago Bears. So I bet 3 to 1 month's pay on Boston College to beat Holy Cross, which is a rival up in D like Xavier, you see. And then my plan was I would go, this would have been around Thanksgiving, and then I would go see them in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, which is relatively close. Except there was a big upset, and Boston College got paid 55 to 12. And it was the night of the famous Coconut Grove fire. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And I learned all of this. I had this hanger on a little radio, and I'd sit in there at night and I'd get all this news from Boston. I was heartbroken. But then the fire, and it was one of the historical nightclub fires. Boston College people were supposed to go there for a victory party, and they all canceled out, fortunately. But a lot of Holy Cross people died in the fire. So anyhow, the town was Nashville, okay, and the song at that time was I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas, which was kind of for somebody from New England, was kind of being down there in this wet Nashville was kind of sad. Anyhow, I suddenly found myself on orders Christmas week and went to Greenwood, Mississippi. Am I going into too much detail?
No, go right ahead. These are good stories.
In Greenwood, Mississippi, you get there, there's a river, the Yazoo River, and there's a sign that says, you are now crossing the Yazoo River into Greenwood, the longest inland long staple cotton in the world. That was what I remember for it. Anyhow, it was what's called a basic training center. Now, in flight training, your initial flight training is primary, and you have a small plane, then you move into a little bigger, which is a basic plane. So that's what it was. Because of this MOS I had of armor, which hung over me for my 3 to 4 years in the military, they put me in ordnance. And so I had, it went about 11 months or so. That's where I worked, and I had my experiences there.
And what did they teach you there?
They didn't teach me anything. Most of the time it was a major and a lieutenant, 3 sergeants, and 3 privates, PFC. And most of the time we just matched nickels. And we did go out and we had a lot of cannons and things. It was a small building. And we ran the ranges, the firing ranges. And like there was a 45 range, targets and just shoot out. I don't know how familiar you are with all that.
Sure.
Anyhow, people like the officers had to qualify for these weapons, and companies like this particular day, the military police company was out in their offices, plus my major, and they were firing. So my job was to lay next to a guy and, show him how to aim. And then I took a break, and I was on the back of this pickup truck was my break time, which I was filling clips with 45 caliber. And one of the guys, one of the other privates, brought a weapon back that had jammed. It was a 45, and I gave him a new one. So I was just kind of dawdling there, and suddenly it went off. And I felt a slight indication on my foot, and I put it down. Meanwhile, my major and these other officers were up at the targets mocking them, and all they could picture was somebody was still shooting. And there was a loud silence, and then who fired that shot? So I tried to distance myself, but they got me. So then they assigned me a lieutenant to handle my court-martial.
Oh, boy.
And the offense was unauthorized report. Okay. But then, because the major let me off the hook, he said I fired into the ground. But all the sergeants were supposed to get promoted that month, but he canceled all their promotions because of this deviant behavior. So I was very unpopular. So then I was there for a while.
What date is this?
Let me think. It would have been 40, 22. It would have been in the spring of 43.
Okay.
I had some nice experiences there, mostly sort of semi-AWOL down to New Orleans. Greenwood was not the best place for a Boston Irish Catholic to be. It became infamous during, I don't know if you remember, the hanging of the Till, several civil rights people that got hanged in Greenwood. It was really a very, very black town, but also very, very up middle class white, and a beautiful Episcopal church, a Baptist and a Methodist church. And my Catholic place was in a room over a shoe store. But I enjoyed the town because the one good restaurant where the officers went was an Italian pasta place owned by a guy from Yankeetown, an Italian couple. And I had met this guy with flaming red hair from Cincinnati who kind of adopted me. And he was I didn't know the term in those days, but he was kind of what you call a very, very wonderful psychopath. And he kind of adopted me, and he, by that I mean, like, he and I checked into the orderly room the same day to see the first sergeant, who was very young for his rank. That's a very big rank, master sergeant. A little on the rotund side, and my friend from Cincinnati said, "Sarge, what do you do? Lift weights or play a lot of football?" And he made me very happy. And then he went on to say that he was a guy that just hung around the barracks and read a lot at night, and he was a typist, and he'd be very happy to help when he saw how busy he was. Anyhow, right away they made him the company clerk. He got promoted very quickly, and he controlled the passes for the squadron that we were in. He could not go out overnight because we had 125% VD rate in our unit. And but my friend would write a pass to get us off post, and then we'd go down to Jackson, which was the capital. We'd hitchhike, and we'd go through these towns. There was a town called Chula, and a couple of towns. And usually on a Saturday night, a Friday night, and extremely whack. It was a whole new sensation for me to see such a congregation. And we'd go to Jackson, and then they had one of these, like the Quality Inn, a rotating restaurant, and we would enjoy an evening on the town. Then Sunday we would head back, and I remember we were hitchhiking, and this couple from Greenwood, with a couple of little kids, picked us up. So we're driving along, and my friend says, "We saw you in church last Sunday." And they said, "Oh, are you Methodist?" No, we're Baptists, but we're thinking of joining the Methodist Church. So that led us into, after payday, we were broke, we'd meet them at church, and they invited us, and then we'd have Sunday dinner, whatever. Anyhow, at that time, there were so many people in the military that, you know, I'm being so lucid, and I just finished writing this, okay, if you don't mind. That there was rumors that if they sent any more troops to Great Britain waiting for D-Day. This would have been 2 or 3 months before, no, it would have been a year, that Great Britain was going to sink. And plus the colleges were becoming deserted because the draft then was hitting. I enlisted, but most people got drafted. And so they came up with a program that if you had 110 T-score, which is the equivalent of an IQ, and if you know, IQ scores run 90 is low average, 100 is average, 110 is high average. If you had 110, you had no choice but to go to college. So I found myself on a bus and heading for University of Alabama, which was our classification. It was called the Army Specialized Training Program. I had been in long enough that I was really suspicious of anything that seemed to be good that the Army was giving you. And anyhow, I kind of read it that they were putting us on ice until they needed us. So I went there, and then on the bus, I met 2 guys, one from New Jersey and one from West Virginia, and we became very close. Now, I mention this because it became a lifetime. That one guy who was kind of a Frank Sinatra crooner, he became my best man after the war, and the other guy died within the last 2 years, recently retired as an appeals court judge. He was one step below the Supreme Court. My story, the book that I read is really, I didn't know what it was going to be, my story, but it came out as kind of a pebble dropping in the water in the concentric circles, and I stopped my story with Pearl Harbor as the pebble. I didn't mean it to be, and then you get all these reactions, concentric, and one of the reactions of my book is a reaction on a guy from a very parochial Irish, Catholic, and Italian, an old Yankee section of Boston, and a guy from West Virginia, and a guy from Baptist Lubbock, Texas, who became all-state football player in the Hall of Fame and all this kind of stuff, and played years later in New York City. So amazing, all these guys did pretty well. We became kind of a 3 musketeer group. But anyhow, they sent us to St. Bonaventure's, which is a lovely little campus, not too far from the Canadian border in upstate New York, maybe about 50 minutes from Niagara Falls, and uh, 5 minutes from the Pennsylvania border. It's up in that, I guess you call it west-north corner of New York. It was run by the Franciscans. And again, I came out of a very, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, a very altar boy mentality from being on the altar before kindergarten into the time I left to go to the military. And this was kind of heaven. It was a campus with grottos with Blessed Virgin, and it aroused all kinds of vocational type of thoughts. Anyhow, this program was to prepare you to be an engineer, and we took fairly heavy stuff. We had all the maths, we had the algebra, the trig, calculus, chemistry, physics, English, a lot of history and military affairs. And anyhow, I just loved the place. And then this would have been in the beginning summer of 43. Anyhow, I never wanted to leave there, except my buddy, well, a notice came out that Rutgers University was starting a branch of this program. And they were asking for volunteers to go there. Now my buddy came from 10 minutes away from Rutgers and had a mother recently widowed. So he felt he had to go back. So as his buddy, I went. So I did 3 months up, a little over 3 months up there in upstate New York, and then ended up in Rutgers, 32 miles outside New York City. Isn't it amazing how I remember details?
It is.
Right. But anyhow, I shouldn't be ad-libbing like that, should I?
Absolutely.
So we did another 6 months there, and studied the same stuff. And that was a wonderful, wonderful place. It was St. Bonaventure was a little campus, much like Boston College. Rutgers was a huge, big place. And it had Boston College, their buildings were Gothic, you know, the Catholic influence. And then Rutgers was more revolutionary, very red. They were kind of, those buildings with white posts. It was just a gorgeous post. And it was famous, his most famous graduate was Paul Robeson. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Again, I'm talking of the 40s. And Paul Robeson was a All-American football player, black. And he was also a great orator and debater. And he became very big in our theater. He was also kind of ahead of his time being civil rights oriented, which got him to be kind of called a socialist. So he ended up much like, I'm thinking of the comedian, Charlie Chaplin. They ended up in Russia. And then they took down all the plaques to him, but they have all put them back up again to him, memorials. But anyhow, we did 6 months there. I did a lot of going into New York City, hitchhiking. I would, because again, I thought this program's not going to last, and I just love New York. And I would hitchhike that 32 miles past the Newark Airport through the Holland Tunnel. Then I'd walk through that part where the 9/11 thing happened, the financial district and the Bowery, Chinatown. And I'd go to the USO in Times Square, which you had in every major place, the USO. And I would get, it was run by Pepsi, and I'd get a free Pepsi-Cola, and I think a hot dog for $9. And then I'd get theater tickets and movie tickets. So the first place I go was the Paramount Theater, and in that era, the Paramount Theater was world known as the theater, and the big bands all played there. Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, all that. Frank Sinatra stuff. He was really a teenager when he started there. And then the bands and the lines used to go around many city blocks, particularly on school days. Kids hitting the and the theater that I went to, I told you up in Boston, was the Arcade of Boston, was a big band theater. And I was a big band. I really saw all of them, Glenn Miller's and Cliff Blair, which you may not know, but I saw him in Boston, and they had this teenage gal who, they were playing at a supper club in the Black District. It was a black man, okay? And she got on that stage that day, and she said, "I'm going to sing a song for the first time that we wrote in the taxi on the way over here today." And it was a Tisket Tasket. I lost my yellow basket. I don't know if and I sang that at home maybe a half a year before my sister realized I hadn't written it. I love that song. But I was very fortunate in being exposed to all that music. But anyhow,
how long were you at Rutgers, and where did your military experience take you from there?
okay, I was there 6 months, and suddenly it would have been maybe February of 44. I did Christmas there. That they discontinued the program, and we got sent to Camp Carlson in Colorado Springs to join the 104th Infantry Division, which had just come in from maneuvers. They had been on maneuvers on the Mojave Desert. They were a division that was primarily from Oregon. A lot of West Coast and people from Texas and Oklahoma made up the division. And we came in to fill it because they were getting ready to go overseas. And so they had been out in the desert. It was kind of a rest camp for them, but for me it was tough because I had never been in the infantry. And we kind of ran around those mountains, and I won't go into how this all happened, but I got pulled out along with one of those guys that's on that bus who stayed at St. Bonaventure's, and we ended up in the same barracks. We both got selected to be in a very, very kind of a distinguished little group called the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Squad of 23 people. And so we trained there. It consisted of an officer and a senior sergeant and a radio operator in one Jeep, and then 2 sets of 3 Jeeps, 2 squads of 10 men, and one had 50 caliber machine gun on it. And by the way, my armor experience stuck with me, and they made me the 50 caliber machine caretaker. But anyhow, we did things. We spent most of the time out in the field. And we'd do compass problems and all that kind of stuff. We were all into map making, so we learned the finger method. When you're doing drawing a map, you put a finger up and you do your distances by the thumb when you measure. And our big thing we drew was Pikes Peak, and then there's 2 hills right next to it. We'd sit on the side of the hill and plotting the distance, and they could take from our finger thing, they were able to figure out what it was in feet type of thing. So these are the kind of things we learned about observing fire. We learned about this, what is called the flash and blast method. I mention this because it became very important overseas. And this is where a gun goes off in the distance, and you right away look at and you put the time down, and you start counting. You see the flash, and then you hear the noise, and you count the seconds between the 2 of those. In other words, light travels faster than sound. Okay, that's the principle. And we would, well, later on, see, we ran these. This is what we did. We did recon patrols. Let me say, we did our training there, and then we went to Europe. Okay. And we were the first group to go directly to Europe, to the mainland of France. And it would have been about 2 months after D-Day. Oh, D-Day broke out when I was at Camp Carson. And that then suddenly everything was gauged to when do we leave. Mm-hmm. And so we took the trains across, then we took a boat across. USS Cristobal, and we landed around the area of Cherbourg. It was where Omaha Beach, and the beach was still pretty littered with stuff.
Really?
you know, from D-Day.
And this was in, say, August?
It would have been in August, yeah. Well, it really was a mess, you know, and we then, we spent a night then traveling over these wet dirt French roads, and then we ended up at daybreak in an area with the hedgerow country. These, well, these are fields, but they have hedgerows which separate them. I don't know if that means anything to you, but the hedgerows in the Normandy invasion was a very big term, and I won't go into all that, okay? But anyhow, our company, and we were a platoon inside of a company. No, yeah, and we were in the headquarters company, which consisted of the wiremen, radio men, and then specialists. We had become intelligence specialists, and then your S1, 2, 3, 4, which would be personnel, intelligence, operations. So it would be the 4 branches with the officers in charge of that stuff. They would be there along with the colonels. And anyhow, we planted ourselves down in this cow pasture is what it really was. And we didn't move too quickly in that the troops had gone only to the German border, but they were running out of gas and food. So they started a thing called the Red Ball Express, which was to expedite supplies and stuff like that up to the front. So they set us down, they took all our drivers and they put them driving trucks. And that for maybe a couple of weeks became the activity. So we just sat there and we had things to do and all that. They gave me special assignment because somehow in checking my file they had found out I had something like 10 years of American school French, so that made me an expert in French. On the boat coming over, they wanted activities, so I had to conduct a French class every day on the boat. I really wasn't that fluent. And so then when I got in the hedgerows, I got pulled off of all details, which were mostly digging holes and that kind of stuff.
Are you right up at the front at this point, or are you
No,
back behind?
no, we were back. We would be maybe 10 miles in from the coast,
Okay.
from Normandy, okay? And I got a huge amount of details because of my perceived fluency in French. So my job was that the first sergeant and the supply sergeant and the guy in charge, the mess sergeant, which is really the power of the army. That triumvirate run the army. First sergeant, the mess sergeant, the supply sergeant. So my job was to go out, and they gave me, I could select anybody, so I selected my 2 buddies. And they gave me free access to the supply room and the kitchen. So I went out with all this barter material into the countryside to barter for cognac for the sergeants. I did this every day. And we would have 5-pound bags of sugar and coffee. This is what we bartered with. Anyhow, we did, and that's what, and my other job was that the officers always sat, we set up a tent, they had tables and plates and all, we kind of lived on it. You can see I was a little bitter about officers, although I ended up as a lieutenant colonel later on. But anyhow, the French people would come and try to go through the food, because they were hurting over there in Europe in that time period. And my job was to shoo them away. So I worked out a spiel, which was essentially, friends, stick around a little bit, get what you want, take off, but come back at 4:30 for supper, because that kept me in. Anyhow, they disappeared, and that intensified the belief that I could speak French. But anyhow, we spent time there, and then suddenly it came, the secret orders we were moving out the next day. It was really top secret. And we were going to head to Belgium. And it was so, about 25 of the local French people, mothers and fathers and kids, came to bid me and my two buddies bonjour. And they brought us a real bottle. Did I mention that? The cognac was Calvados, which is an apple drink. They gave us a real bottle and a big bouquet of flowers. And so off we went, and we were fortunate. Most of our infantry traveled in what they call 40 and 8s. Have you ever heard this term?
No.
It's a World War I term. And in the American Legion parades after World War I, which were huge in all images, they always had this little a caboose train. And it's 40 and 8. It comes from the thing of, how's that go? 40 hommes et 8 cheval, which means 40 men and 8 horses. So they were set up to carry 40 men and 8 horses. And they're really very, very primitive trains. We were fortunate we had our jeeps, and so we traveled up along the French coast and then into Brussels. Brussels had been taken, that's the capital of Belgium, okay? I shouldn't insult you, but anyhow, that had been taken. There was a lot of towns that were pretty beat up on the way, but Brussels really was not too badly hit. It's an ancient university cathedral type city, you know, like most wonderful European cities. And we went to the other, maybe 20 miles the other side of it, and then we went into this estate, took over, and well, we lived outside on the ground, and we were about 5 or 6 miles from the Dutch border. And the purpose, and we joined the 1st Canadian Army. We became, which I've often thought when they have these discussions, like over in Serbia and all, about our troops being under other nations, we have precedent for that. We were part of the 1st Canadian Army, and we became their infantry. And then they had British engineers and Polish artillery. It was kind of a mixed bag. And the thing was, meanwhile, the first night we got there, every evening we'd hear these things. They were buzz bombs. These were these early rockets were being flown into Antwerp, which was the big Belgian port. So our job was to open up the roads, to push the Germans and open up the roads to Antwerp. Free Antwerp is what it was. So anyhow, we did that, okay? And that was very much living in the ground, and it was tough. A lot of the Germans had flamethrowers. It was our introduction to combat.
What was the first, after your first night there, and you heard the buzz bombs, when was your first experience, first encounter with
The next morning, the next day, we were sent out. What was happening, Holland is very flat in contrast to Germany, which means there's not hills to hide in. So they were moving back, and they would move back 20 or 30 miles so they'd hit, say, a wood or something. Our job was to go out and find them, which we did. Mm-hmm. And if necessary, not fire our weapons or anything, but that we go and I don't even know what to do. Then we came back, and then that night, we spotted where they were, and then the infantry took off that night. Our job was to go in before the infantry and find out where the enemy was. And if we're lucky, not to get captured ourselves. So that's what we kind of did on home, was going ahead, clearing, saying this 15 miles is clear, and then expect resistance here. So that was kind of what we did up in Holland. And
when did you first see your first German soldier?
It was that next day. We spotted a little, in a little wooded place, we spotted. We had glasses and all that, okay? And that was my first German. While we were there, we did get into a battle, which in my book I refer to the Battle of the Farmhouse, where we were out on an evening patrol.
How many, when you say we, how many are you at this point?
Be 23.
Just 3 of you?
23.
23, okay.
And this thing, within a couple of days, we had our first casualty. Our lead Jeep hit a shoe mine. SCHU is the name, but it refers to, it usually blows your shoe or your ankle off. Anyhow, our lieutenant and our radio operator and another guy, they were the lead Jeep, and they hit one of these, got turned over, and they got evacuated. So this night we were out was a major, West Point major, who was on our S2, which is the regimental intelligence officer, for whom we really were collecting data for. They shipped back, and they had all these rooms with big maps, and we'd feed the data in.
I see.
And, but anyhow, we had a real, very, very vicious fight this particular night out with him. And then we were able to get back. We had trouble getting back. We were maybe 20 miles inside the German lines. And we had Jeeps. We painted out our, our lights were blacked out, and it was just a little tiny dot. It was pretty, how you went down a road in complete darkness in strange country was an adventure in itself. So that was a tough battle.
Do you want to tell anything about that battle, how it started and what occurred during
Well,
the
we came, it was a combination of walking and driving, okay? And he used me that night, the major, because we ran into some stray French person who was able to give us data about, and he used me to talk to him about what was up ahead, which was by this farmhouse, and there was a relatively large contingent of Germans out dug in this field. So we got there, and we went into the farmhouse and found what we found, but then somehow or other the guns started going off, and grenades. It was really kind of, you looking at your watch, I'm taking
No, I just wanted to check the time. You're all right. Okay. We're okay. Our camera operator is telling us we're good on
I call it a farce, and in my book I refer to it this evening battle, F-A-R-C-E. And I have a letter in my book from this general, who later became general, who was the major that night. In his letter to me, he enjoyed it. He said, it's amazing how one can be in a place and see things so differently. Now, he got the Silver Star, which was typical in a thing like that. You got the officer and senior sergeant got a medal. PFCs was something else again. But anyhow, that's the name of the game. But he saw it one way. I saw it as guys throwing grenades and forgetting to pull the pins out. Getting one of our Jeeps stuck in the ditch. We had to pull that out. And there was a bunch of other little kind of, which in review were very laughable, but at the time were very, very serious. Anyhow, we got back, and one of the toughest things was getting back through our own lines, because we had to go through these scouts, and because the rumor had that we had been completely wiped out. And the infantry battalion knew that we had a recon out, but then the word was that we were wiped out. And
did you take casualties that night? Did you take casualties that night?
We took a couple. They were slight. Our medic got a cut across the sheet. I think the Germans were as scared as we were that night. But anyhow, we had another big encounter, but we had a river crossing, and one of our companies, infantry companies, had got pinned down on the other side of this river by snipers from the field. So they called on us, because we were mobile, plus we had heavier firepower. We went across, and then we got fired on, and we ended up, and again, I mentioned these two guys that we were always together. We went down a dike. We had the hedgerows in France, okay? Well, like up in Vermont, you have rocks that separate. In Holland, little brooks, little, bodies of water. They're kind of small dikes, okay? Separate the fields. They're drainage pits. We crawled up those and we came to this farmhouse, and there was a soldier with a German machine gun who was pinning these people down. And we had to drop on him, and he put his hands up rather quickly. And he was maybe all of 15 years of age. And anyhow, I mentioned we had lost our lieutenant. And then the major then took us out. But on this side, we had this new lieutenant, right out of OCS, which in the States. And he was kind of a wild man. And when the firing all stopped, he finally came up. And there was a barn and a farmhouse. And this guy had been shooting, had put himself between these two. He came and he saw his first German. And immediately he had carbine. He opened up fire and, killed the son of a gun, and opened up fire and killed him. The kid dropped down into, there was kind of a watering pond. He then started giving us all kinds of crazy orders. And even though we were only PFCs, we told them that we were taking over, in which we were really in danger of being in real trouble. But we had enough credibility at that time that the colonel of the regiment sided with us, and they shipped him back somewhere. And somebody told me I saw him directing, an MP directing traffic in Paris. But that was, that we had a couple casualties. That was a kind of a very, very tough thing. In fact, in review, I would say our little time up there in Holland, even though it was maybe a month and a half, was maybe the toughest experience, because we were really doing infantry, living in the holes in the ground and really that kind of fire. And the thing that scared me the most was the Germans had these flamethrowers, and they'd come and spray them into the foxholes. But they accomplished their mission. There was a town that we kind of approached, and then all this, the room on the side of the town of Utenbusch, which was a big cathedral city, Dutch cathedral city. And after we had accomplished everything, then our job was to go back and move the headquarters, the offices, up to a new post. And we had to go through that town. It was like, the victory parade. Anyhow, I'm on a Jeep, and I have this 50 caliber machine, and I sit up there, look very, very important, And then they had these long buildings, and they had all these seminarians with their, out the window, and they all suddenly had, I'm convinced that everyone in Belgium and Holland had two sets of flags. They had German flags and then American flags. But anyhow, from my altar boy days, I'm up there and they yell, and I said, Nominus Vobiscum. Now, that's Latin in a mass. I don't know if you guys know that stuff. No, it was Pax Vobiscum. Peace be with you. And the answer is, and with you, okay? So there I am, with a helmet, tough looking GI, completely tough looking man. And they're up there, mostly bespectacled, very intellectual looking guys. So they all became very silent until they realized what I had said. And then they immediately started screaming at me. I became their hero. I have a little bit of the psychopath in me, I guess, because I repeated this. I know a few words. I know how to say alla santé in almost every language, in Polish, and that gets you a lot of distance, because with military, most of these situations are in drinking situations, okay? But anyhow, they then pulled us out, and we traveled, maybe about 150 miles down the Belgium, and then Belgium-German border, and we were being relocated to Aachen. Aachen is the first city you hit when you come to Germany. And it's one of the oldest cities in Germany.
Mhm.
And it's called Aachen. The French name, all these towns on this side of the Rhine have a French name and a German name because they go back and forth. On the French maps, it's called Aix-Chapelle, City of Chapels. Aachen is the German one, I guess. But it's a gorgeous city, but it really had been hit badly. And around it is, they had the Maginot Line and then the German line, all these cement bunkers that, they're kind of famous. You know what I'm talking about?
I've seen them, yeah.
Well, they stretch for miles, the anti-tank stuff and all that. And we entered that place, and we're up on the top of the hill, and you could look this way and see Belgium. You could look this way and see France, and you look this way and you're looking down into the city of Aachen. And if you could look over the mountain with maybe 40 miles down was Luxembourg, so if you have an idea where we were.
Sure.
So anyhow, we went into battle on the outskirts of Aachen. We joined the 1st American Army, which was quite an honor, okay? And we replaced the 1st Infantry Division, which is the Big Red One, which is the most famous infantry division. And our general, his name is very famous, his name was Terry de la Mesa Allen. And he had been the commanding general of the Big Red One, 1st Division, down in Africa, and then into Italy. And then as they got into the approach of Rome, he got into a spitting contest with General Patton. And Patton won out, and they shipped Allen back to the United States. He then put our division together and brought us back, okay? We were we loved this man, okay? And he was a wonderful, wonderful man. So it was a real honor that we went in under the cover of darkness, top secret, and like my little group, we moved into this upstairs room in a factory, which was an observation post, okay? This is what we did, okay? We either went out on patrols, behind the lines, cut the wires, and then wait for their their wireman to come and fix it, and we'd capture them. We would do that. All those other things we told. Oh, we sat for hours up in these high points with the powerful scopes and glasses, scanning the thing, okay? And as a side, later on as we got into the towns, it would usually be the school building of the church. We'd always take the second highest room because the Germans were expecting you to be on the top. And they trained their glasses on the top floor, and we were always on the next one. Okay. We went in
Excuse me one minute, Hugh. Okay. We only have a couple minutes left. And I'm sorry to say this, I'm going to have to run in 2 minutes myself.
Okay, see, you got to...
You've got, excuse me, a great history and
We did 4 months going 26 miles to the Rhine River, Cologne. We got to Cologne, we were sitting there on the river, on the bridge, Raga Bridge right below us. We then switched and went over, and then we went, my little group, we became a liaison with 3rd Armored Division and started traveling 20 miles a day. And then we went and ended up close to the Elbe River and met the Russians. And
wow.
Then they brought us back to the United States because we were a hot division for the invasion of Japan, which didn't happen.
That story right there, from Aachen
Yeah.
to the Russians,
Yeah.
could be a whole other session, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so...
That's okay. I thought you did a great job. I want to thank you.
Well, I get out, and like all of us, they said, don't you want to go to OCS? And we hated the Army, and officers in particular. And all of us went back to school under the GI Bill. We all got married. We all lived in our mother's home for a while, and then under the GI Bill bought a house. Graduated. I went to graduate school, got a master's in social work. I went back into the Army as a second lieutenant and did 20 more years.
Wow.
And finished up as a regular Army lieutenant colonel in the Medical Service Corps.
Did you go to Korea or Vietnam?
No, I went to Europe. My job was working these huge big hospitals, right? Like we had burn units, with loss of limbs in particular.
Nice.
I was a counselor, really, mostly psychiatric.
Well, Mr. Daly, I want to thank you very much for your service and for your time here today. I thought the interview went terrific.
The other day was this verbose.
Hi, we're back with Hugh Daly here. It's January 23rd, 2007. And when we left off before, now Mr. Daly had been able to more or less tell his whole story about his time in the war, but we had to compress some of the most important parts, and due to lack of time. So we've invited him back today to pick up in November of 1944 as his unit, a segment of the 104th Army Division, crosses into Aachen and carries through the rest of the war. Mr. Daly, can you tell us your first impression when you went into Aachen and what your job was when you got there?
Well, the devastation, it had been really long in that, again, it was Aachen is one of the oldest cities in Germany. And like many of the cities on this side of the Rhine, they have a French name and a German name. Aachen is the German name. Aix-Chapelle is the French, which means city of chapels. So it was one of these gorgeous Gothic cities, but it had really been bombed and bombed. The Siegfried line was right in front of it. These are all these bunkers that were supposed to be invincible, and airplanes and tanks had bombed that city, and there weren't many civilians. The civilians had moved out, moved on. The ones that were there had very grim faces. There was no smiling going on, that type of stuff. The city had been taken. We came in, having come down from Holland, from the lowlands of Holland, along the along the German border through the Belgium and French towns, putting up at night, sleeping on the side of the road. We were very tired after our 2 weeks in Holland, where we lived pretty much on the land in foxholes that the water would rise, and we arrived there, and our first flight, we were in a cemetery. Remember, we were moving forward, hiding behind the tombstone because we didn't know what was ahead of us. But eventually, we got in there and we went to Stolberg, which is a suburb of Aachen, and is where the combat line was at that point. And we were to replace the 1st Infantry, the famous Big Red One, 1st Infantry Division, which was, and we're also now in the 1st Army as compared to serving under the Canadians with the Polish and the British up in Holland. We were now part of the 1st United States Army, so we were kind of proud. So we were to go in that night, and again, my job in my group was a member of a specialized 23-man intelligence and reconnaissance group. And we were motorized with 7 Jeeps, as we mentioned. And we were to take over the Big Red One's positions, which were observation posts in a factory. We had now moved in to a terrain much different from Holland. Holland was flat. It had no cover. And so you would go 20 miles until you found a place with some cover, and the Germans would retreat that far. This was factories. We took over what was called an observation post, which was a room and the upper floors of a factory. These are huge, big factories. And it was all secret, us moving in. About 10 o'clock that night, we were startled to hear a loudspeaker from behind the German line saying, "Welcome to Germany, Timberwolf division, which was kind of, I don't have us about this. We referred to these as whispering posts. And the reason for that is that we were in one room, the Germans were in other rooms, and the fact we were that close. And you could really, if you talk loud, if somebody coughed, it brought in a big round of mortar fire. It was that chummy. And it was so different from the more wide spaces at home.
Was there any combat inside the factory?
Yeah. And there were a series of buildings. These are huge, big factory complexes, and these red brick buildings, one after the other. And so we sat up in these, what I called a whispering post, and we had very powerful, we had binoculars and we had scopes, these powerful scopes. And we would just, look for sounds and sights. And then we had a telephone radio that we would call back, would feed our data back into the regimental headquarters. The artillery observers, fort observers, we allowed them to come in because we usually built up sandbags and that stuff to protect our little area. And these artillery observers would come in and sit with us. And then these things that we would identify outside there, they then would bring mortar fire or cannon fire in on it. And it was just amazing how accurate they were. And we got very, very close. These were usually very senior sergeants and very skilled people. And so...
How long would it take from the time he called in a fire mission until the time that artillery
Well,
hit the
sometimes
target?
what they would do, we would report that at a certain time in the day, there seemed to be troop action. Maybe they're going to their little mess hall or something, and we would see that for 2 days, that we'd get this repeated data that at that time, this is when we got movement. So then they would take the day and they would set it up. And it wasn't like there was any attack going on, so there wasn't a need for immediate type of fire. At that time, I mentioned General Terry D. Mesa Allen, who had been the commander of the Big Red One in North Africa and in Italy. He had become convinced that the name of the game was night fighting. He was convinced that fighting at night, you had the element of surprise, that you had many less casualties, and that what you did is you attacked at night, and then the next day you used for mopping up and taking over the land. So now, in this time period, my work, when I say mine, I mean myself and my colleagues, was running the observation post and then going out on patrols. In these so-called peaceful periods, which was early, compared to violent combat, we were more active because there was scouting and information was needed. So we would go out and go behind the lines and we'd cut their wires. And then we'd wait until their wiremen came out to repair the wire and then would capture them.
Did this happen fairly often?
Well, maybe twice a week.
Wow.
And particularly as you got real close to the anticipated jump off. So
How would you know where to find their wires?
oh, well, you just kind of go along until just like our wires, we had wires spread all over the place. You just kind of kept going until you found it. And plus you could kind of look at the terrain and you kind of see areas where you would think they would tend to be, and over here that somehow would be between that. So we also, another chore we had, the next big city was Eschweiler. And then there was Westweiler and East. But anyhow, that was another industrial. There was just a series. There was wooded areas and hills, and then big industrial centers. From there to the Ruhr River. Since the last time I was here, I came across this book, and I was unaware. It's called The Longest Battle. And then if I read it, it says September 1944 to February 1945, from Aachen to the Ruhr and beyond, which is exactly the area that I and my people were in.
Are you featured in there? Is your unit
No,
featured?
oh, our division is.
Yes.
Our division, the 30th Division, the 1st Division, in here. Now, the beauty of this book is that it gives the American viewpoint, but it also gives the German. They have data from the Germans as to what they were doing during that same time period. It's a well-researched book. And by the term longest battle, thing is, we're talking about from Aachen to the Ruhr River, and then to Cologne. And so Aachen to the Ruhr River is maybe 25 miles. And then to Cologne in the Rhine River is another 25 miles, roughly. It's just 50 miles, yet they had come from D-Day all the way to Aachen, in about 6 weeks. And here, you're talking in terms of about 6 or 7 months to go 50 miles. And so, what are the reasons for that? Okay, one is that the terrain. It was a different type of terrain. But in this book, they start off, and I think the biggest reason, if I may read from this is from Hitler, okay? The battle in the West has largely moved on to German soil, which is Aachen. German cities and villages will be the battlegrounds. This fact must make our fighting more fanatical and harden every available man in the battle zone to turn every bunker, every apartment block in a German city, every German village into a fortress. And that was said on 17 September 1944. So my group, we came into that area in November. Other groups, the 1st Infantry, the 3rd Armored Division, had been trying to breach that area since September. And here was September, October, November. And they had moved so fast, but then boom.
Yeah.
And part of it was the terrain. The other part of it was it's like if we were being attacked here in Cincinnati, we would fight for our families, and the fighting was much more intense. Well, anyhow, we went out on these little missions and did our observations. So finally the day came for the infantry to jump off on attack. And so they pulled the infantry back about a half mile. And the marker was going to be the Inde River, I-N-D-E. And that was the river that we would go out, well, that was, I don't know what I mentioned, we would go out and we would measure the depth of it and the width and that type of thing, and try to judge the flow of the water. Because we were going to have to cross it to get into Edgewater. Yeah, it would be somewhat, the lines were really kind of confused in there.
How are you avoiding German patrols?
Well, we were well trained. First we did everything at night, okay? Another thing is, one of the rules of night fighting, we became famous as the night fighters. In fact, we were highly criticized, but the British called us, they thought we were just barbaric because they didn't go out at night. I mean, they were great, but they didn't go out at night. And one of the German newspapers quote that this period was one of the most vicious interplays between armies in the history of the militaries. This area there in between Aachen and the Ruhr River, particularly between Aachen and Eschweiler. Anyhow, the Air Force came in and they bombed the lines in front of us. And we pulled back because, we didn't want to bomb ourselves.
Right.
So, anyhow, so then this was like in the maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, okay, and then probably jumped off around 5 o'clock. we ran into vicious opposition. When I say we, actually when the real combat started, that was our rest period. Our period was between the combats, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so, when I say we, I wasn't jumping off, okay? It was these wonderful, wonderful, real dog faces. And they ran into vicious, vicious opposition. And we were always critical of the Air Corps. The infantry was always criticizing the Air Corps, okay? And one of our battalion commander, after all of these bombings, which was estimated it may have been one of the heaviest bombings in the history of air bombings, what had happened there. He said we could have done better with a couple of our liaison planes, these little tiny, with a couple of boxes of grenades. We ran into. Anyhow, we went on and we took the city of Eschweiler. And this was just, it was a huge, we personally did. The 30th Infantry took above us and the 1st Infantry took below us. I had particularly been one of the people that had to go on out into that river and do the measurements. So I came up with a real bad cold. So they evacuated me on very high, and they also were concerned that I might be getting trench foot from that, because it was a very pretty cold area. So I missed Thanksgiving. They did Thanksgiving in a Goss house, you know, Goss house,
yeah.
And they just took it over. And so I missed all that, which wasn't all that bad because they had got food poisoning and we had a lot of diarrhea, which I missed out on. But I went back to Spa in Belgium, and I was back there for a while. And then when I returned, our division was on the other side of Eschweiler in another huge, big factory area. And I joined my group, and we were in one of the back rooms of this factory, which was pretty good, being inside of a building to sleep at night. Except we had our cannon company, which was right behind us, so they were going with their big guns, so we didn't get too much sleep. We had a lot of, we sat there, we kind of watched the B-17s and the B-24s, the British and Americans making their runs on Cologne and bombing those cities, and they would come over during the day, another group, and the British tend to come in the day, the Americans in the night. So we watched that, we watched dogfights between fighter planes, and then we saw the first jets in the sky, and you know, they're so fast, and they just ran away from our American planes.
Wow.
And so that was kind of interesting. We also had this little liaison observation German plane. They came over at the same time every night, something like 6:30, and they dropped these little torpedo bombs down on us, and we had to jump inside on that type of thing. So we were real quiet, but finally we jumped off. We moved out. There was a town of Lusgendorf, which was overlooked the Ruhr Valley in the Ruhr River, and it was a huge big coal pile. This factory that was in made briquettes, with briquette, kind of coal. And anyhow, this slag pile must have been, it was like the size of a 2 or 3 story building. And we had an observation post up there, and we could look all the way out across the valley. And I found out that in the 30th Division was to our north, and my next door neighbor from back home, a real chum, was in that unit. So I wrote him a letter, and I had some reservations because he had got a CMTC, which is the Civilian Military Corps, commission at age 18, and he was really gung-ho military, and he was now a captain, which me as a PFC, that was a different world. Anyhow, I was out on the slag pile one day, and Germany was a very damp and cold and snowy place in that time period. This would have been early December. And I came back in the I heard over our radio that there was a guy looking back at headquarters wanted to visit with me. And the days, it didn't get light until 9:30 in the morning, and then it would be dark again at 3:30. It was that type of thing. So I came back, and I really looked like G.I. Joe because I had the icicles dropping from my head. It really was cool. Anyhow, I met with this guy, which was quite a thrill. And then I tried to get him to stay and have supper with us in a pretty primitive mess. But he had to go 50 miles back to the rear echelon, and then he'd go 10 miles that way, and then 50 miles back in.
Wow.
And so it was getting darker and darker, so he didn't stay, but it was quite a visit for him. Now, I mention this because this guy had been a POW, and he escaped, and then he insisted on rejoining his outfit, which was really unusual because if you're a POW and you get escaped and recaptured, it's okay to kill you. But he went back to his unit. And then the next thing was, while I was sitting there, the bulge broke out. Is everybody familiar with that? This would have been maybe mid-December, which was right to our south, okay? And it was through the forests into the Luxembourg area. And they called it the bulge because the Germans very quickly were developing land, and you saw on the maps, each day the bulge was getting bigger. In fact, it was almost getting towards the back of us. They pulled the 30th Division and the 1st Division, which were on the flanks. They pulled them out to send them in. The 106th Infantry Division was a brand new division that had just got to had never been in combat, and were occupying this area, which is in a relatively quiet period. And they're the ones that the Germans choose to, well, that area, that route in history is very famous as where the Germans would attack France and Belgium. And so this was really a rookie division. And we tended to not ever let ourselves be seen. We would run between buildings, but they were just out there running the vehicles down the street. So it was very obvious that they were amateurs at that point. It doesn't take too long to become a pro, like 2 days. And so they really got beat. And so these two infantry divisions on our left and right, they pulled out, and we extended because they didn't know whether there'd be a breakthrough further up on this area. At this point, we were sitting on the Roar River. I'll get back to that. But I was talking about this guy. He went down there and with his company. The next I knew, he got his side of his face blown off. And then it was maybe 30 years later, I had the pleasure of sitting with him and his family back in Boston. It was just before he died. His life was a series of going to the VA hospital, plastic surgery. And I mention this because this, to me, was my hero of World War II. He was just, unreal. I was among these reluctant college students. And anyhow, we had gone into this town of Merkin, and which was right on the river, like 100 yards from the river. And we took over this building, one of the most substantial buildings in the town, which was a convent. And our living area became their chapel on the back side of there was about 8 or 9 of us. And we lived in this room in the chapel in the back of the convent. At nighttime, we would go up to the next to top floor and listen. And it was a listening post, listen for anything that might be, and seeing what you could see. In the daytime, we used to cross the street out the back and then run from building to building, and then went to the schoolhouse, and we had an observation post with these powerful scopes and all, which looked over onto the other side of the river. So that became our day, with occasional going down to measure the flow and the depth of the river.
Were you able to see the enemy over there? Were they
Oh, yes, you
sniper
could see
fire?
you could see, it was mostly, it would be when their shower wagons would bring up the food, that kind of stuff. And, I mean, we could see probably a half mile. I'll just make a mention, and I may have mentioned it before. We had learned that you never put your OP on the top floor or on the top of it. Have I mentioned this before?
You have. I think it's a great tactic. There.
Yeah, okay. Now one of my dear friends, who was one of our corporals, in running through one of these buildings, on a Sunday morning, again, one of those planes just dropping these kind of, I call them torpedo bombs. They just send out a lot of stuff and you get shrapnel in it. He got hit, and I always felt very badly that somehow, that he was such a wonderful guy from the farms of Iowa, and that was an episode there. Anyhow, the Bulge, we stayed there, and it was kind of our town. Other than us, you very seldom saw an officer. A lieutenant would come up around payday, and they'd bring up PX rations. They'd bring up cigarettes and stuff. And he'd always, now the officers got a liquor ration, and so he would bring up and give us a bottle of scotch. And then we very seldom saw senior sergeants. There was an infantry battalion strung along the river dug in. And so it was a GI town. But then the weather began to clear as we get into January and then into February. The fogs lifted. Our Air Force our Air Force was able to come in. Patton came up from the south, and he helped out, and the Bulge was punching.
So during that period, during the Battle of the Bulge, you all just held your position?
We held up positions, yeah.
Did you receive any attacks?
We would be fired on. It was usually at the same time every day. They'd fire into the town. And we had one situation, and it was New Year's Eve. And the way we operated, we had this OP in Merkin, and then our other squad was about 3 miles down the river in another town, had a similar thing. And so we're both looking out. Stop me if I've gone through this before.
I don't think you have.
Okay, and we did a thing called triangulation. Okay, we'd sit there looking, and then you see a flash. And then we have this thing of the flash blast, and it has to do with sight is faster than, light travels faster than sound, okay? And so what we would do, we'd see this blast, which would be a gun going off. So we'd immediately take a compass reading, it'd be like 36, or whatever it was, and we'd start counting, 1, 2, and we get so many seconds. And then we'd pick up our phone and say 37 degrees, 4, which meant that, and then meanwhile, they would see it down below, and they would take a compass reading, which would be more like, say, a 280, and they could count. Mm-hmm. And then, ideally, back at headquarters, they had all these maps. They would cross those lines, and that was where the gun was supposed to be. Uh-huh. And then, the counting, they had formulas that they could say that 4 seconds, that meant it was such a distance away, light and sound. So that was kind of interesting. We were pretty smart guys. We were all and so anyhow, on New Year's Eve, our other squad, they sent out a patrol. It was their turn to go out. And they crossed over this blown out bridge. There, and the next town across the river was Duren, D-U-R-E-N, a pretty good sized town. And they were going out to get a prisoner, and they got entrapped in a minefield. So boom, one went off, and this guy lost these were shoe lines. I mean, they're called shoe lines, SCSU, but we refer to them as what they did is they blew your shoe off and your ankle. So it ended up that 4 of our guys, 4 out of maybe 7, lost at least one leg.
Wow.
On that. So
Wow.
that was pretty, we're pretty shook up on that.
Sure.
We had our share of deaths and our share of injuries, casualties, but this really, because we said, gee, it could have been our turn. And they were very dear, very dear friends of ours. Anyhow, everything cleared up, and then, if I may refer to my notes, I don't know, but, okay, on the 23rd of February is when, was the date that the push across the Royal River onto Cologne. And they had a tremendous pre-bombing of artillery and all of this, and then they came the jump off. And that was on the 23rd of February. So and then we crossed, they had put up a punt. By the time, it was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when all these guns started. And as we were watching, it was like watching fireworks from our OP. And then we moved across, our little squad, about 6 in the morning. But by that time, they had put up a pontoon bridge. The engineers were fantastic. Oh, in this town of Merck, I mentioned how it was strictly us guys. But then as it began to approach the Bulge, winding down, there was more and more traffic. There were groups moving into the city, even the Navy bringing up pontoon boats and all that kind of stuff, and temporary bridges ready for the attack. And they were less cautious than us, and they showed themselves, which meant that night we would get quite a bit of shelling after they came. Another episode was sometime before the airport had bombed 3 miles. They misread the river. They saw a river and they got the wrong river, and they bombed our own. It would have been like something like a MASH unit. And we had quite a few deaths on that. So then they started kind of a public relations program, and they started sending these young pilots from England and bring them over, and they wanted to get a feel of the infantry, and they'd come in their nice jackets and their white scarves. And somebody mentioned to him about the bombing, and the guy said, oh, that was too bad, but it was one of our most perfect patrons. And then we retaliated with things like, gee, it must be tough having strawberry ice cream 7 days in a row. It was that kind of thing, okay? Anyhow, we jumped off and headed for Cologne. One episode, and then we kind of cleared away for the tank, which was the 3rd Armored Division, okay? And one episode which was very sad, was something like 3 or 4 of our battalion commanders were having a huge big meeting in a farmhouse on this, what they call the Plains of Cologne. It suddenly got very flat, and Cologne was just tank country. And a bomb fired from one of these big railroad guns landed right on this farmhouse.
Wow.
And killed 3 or 4 of our battalion commanders.
Wow.
March 6th, Cologne was taken. And during that time period, we were living in houses, taking showers, our little group, we were having a ball, which was quite a contrast, because we had to change our clothes. And I was lucky, I went to the hospital and I got a change of clothes. But anyhow,
What sent you to the hospital?
Back there at Eschweiler, I got the cold, and they thought I had trench feet.
Okay.
So as soon as the city was taken, then we got the word, and boom, they rushed us up to the banks of the Rhine River, and we moved into a big warehouse. It had a wharf right on the river, and we set up our OP up in the upstairs, and we had vision up and down the Rhine, and most of it was blown out, gorgeous blown out bridges. There wasn't too much action. There's one episode is that we captured a Mata Hari beautiful spy coming over in a rowboat.
How'd that happen?
We we spotted something out there on the river. It was at nighttime, and then we went down on the wharf, and when they pulled in, we just grabbed them. And so she was lovely. But anyhow,
Oh, well, what happened to her? What
well, they took her back.
Oh.
The MPs came, and then again, we just did things, and what happened? Well, anyhow, our second squad, their job was to patrol the streets at night, and they would go out along the river, and then they would end up in the courtyard of the famous Cologne Cathedral, which is very, very famous. It was started in something like the year 300 and completed in the year 1100, and it's gorgeous. And amazingly, it wasn't the windows were all shattered, but it had not one bomb had really dropped on it in a neighborhood that was completely demolished. And so our second squad, they would go out. Now they would walk in front of the jeeps because at nighttime the Germans would spread wires across the street. And if a jeep came along, it could decapitate the driver. So it was very, very slow business. So we're sitting there, and we were living in a house somewhere. And when the word came that the Remagen Bridge had been taken, and that was about 50 miles to our south. So then we got set, and the party was over in the nice living, and we got pushed down to Remagen. And so then our infantry joined this, it was a tank battalion that took that bridge, and then our infantry division went across and established a beachhead. It was about 30 miles this way and maybe 5 miles in by infantry fighting. And so then the armored division was able, plus by the time we crossed, March 17th, March 6th, Cologne was taken. March 17th, Remagen had been taken, and the bridge collapsed because it had already, well, they were bombing it. There's a big story about that bridge, and Hitler was very, very upset that it had not been blown. But anyhow, it became suddenly open for the tanks, the 3rd Spearhead Division, who I feel very close to. Myself and my 2 buddies, my story in a way is about 3 guys, in review of my book. I mentioned this before. 3 guys, me from Boston, Catholic ghetto of Boston, a guy from Lubbock, Texas, big football player, and a guy from West Virginia, who under normal circumstances wouldn't speak to each other, okay, back in those days, who came, and we were side by side then for all those months watching each other's back, okay? We were all a year and a half of college. Tuffy was one of them, football player, is in the Hall of Fame in Texas Tech Hall of Fame as a football player. The other one, Jimmy, was a 135-pound lightweight boxing champ and ended up 2 years ago. He died having retired from the appeals court, the federal appeals court, which is one step from the Supreme Court. So these guys, now there was a third one of the buddies. He was in the other squad from Oregon. He ended up with a PhD from Harvard plus undergraduate at Yale, and is quite a famous writer up in Oregon. So our little group turned out okay.
Yeah.
Anyhow, we went across, and then they picked us out, our squad, to be the liaison with the tankers. And then, so we took off with the tanks, 3 jeeps. One of them which had I had the 50 caliber machine gun. Then we also had a radio man with us. And we took off, and it was quite a change, where it took all those months to go those 50 miles. Here we were going 20, 30 miles a day in the tank. And they put up, as the sun went down, they put up at night and picked out some houses, and they had hot food. It really, they would run, as we went along, they'd run into maybe some resistance in a town. They'd just back up into a field. These big tanks would line up, and they'd lob stuff in, and we would go shave off to the side. It it was now getting to be springtime, okay, enjoy the sun, and have a nap. And then off we'd go again through the town, and would be burning. And one thing about the Germans, within hours of their town being hit, they were out there cleaning up. Unlike the French, who I mean, many years afterwards had some cleaning up to do. You know, I shouldn't say that, okay, but
That's one of the best quotes in the interview, I think.
anyhow, so we moved on and on. One episode, we were just trying, Jimmy and Tuffy and I were sitting on the steps of this farmhouse, could have been about 9 o'clock in the morning, and these two command jeeps drove up. One of them was our general, who we adored, and the other was General Maurice Rose, who was the commanding general of the 3rd Armored Division, equally esteemed by his men. And they met. And General Allen, who was quite a character, called over and said, "Hey, soldier, you got a light?" So Tuffy was the cigar smoker, went out and quivering. You know, the general held his hand, but it was one of the little tricks he had that wherever he went to make the GI seem important. I think really he was quite a leader. Now the sad part of that night, General Rose got entrapped in a ambush and was killed.
No kidding, that very night?
Yeah.
How far from you was the ambush?
Oh, it could have been within 10, 15 miles, okay, somewhere, yeah. And so, anyhow, what was happening was we were going dead east, okay, which would be the 1st Army. Up to the north, the British and the 9th Army were going dead east. And it was called the Ruhr Valley. It was a very famous factory. Essences, on crossword puzzles, they say Ruhr Valley town is Essence. And the big coal mining, all this type of stuff. And so we were moving with the tankers. Now our division followed, and they were going in, mopping up. And so we went maybe 50, 60 miles, and then we turned, and we met at a town called Paderborn. And that was the encirclement of the Ruhr Valley. And something like, if I was reading my book, I would have the exact number. It was like 300,000, over 300,000 prisoners were taken.
Wow.
And something like 29, I think it was, German generals were captured. And it was really the twilight of the war. From our point of view, compared to what we had gone through before, you know, this was a piece of cake, you know. So at that point, we said adieu to our dear friends, the 3rd Armored Division, and we took off going east. And we just rode along, and we put up in one town. It was kind of a resort town, and we really had hit into a lull. And in fact, the officers and most of the NCOs went off on R&Rs, recreation and recuperation, like back to Paris, and we, the 3 Musketeers, decided to go on a little adventure on our own. So we took off this sunny afternoon, and again, the weather was much improved. And we just kind of walked and walked. And we really suddenly found ourselves about maybe 2 miles behind the lines in this town. And then all the people rushed at us. They wanted to surrender because the Russians were coming in the other way. They wanted to surrender. Anyhow, we're on the road, and then Jimmy, the future judge, he was a born leader. He said to the Burgermeister, get all the weapons, have the people bring all their weapons down here, because collecting weapons was a big thing, okay? And every German house had a weapon. So it was on this road, and suddenly this vehicle, somewhat like a Jeep, came roaring down the road. There were 3 guys in civilian clothes, very closely cropped hair, and we kind of saw they were throwing things off. They were these little the grenades that you can hold in your hand like that. And compared to the German grenades were like, we called them mashed potato. They went like this. Our grenades were like big eggs.
Yeah.
But these were little tiny, and they were getting rid of those, and we were beginning to get scared. There was 3 of us. We're in deeper than we want to be. And so anyhow, these guys somehow got back into their vehicle, and they took off back to the east from where they came. The next thing you know, this French soldier in a sort of beret ragged uniform came up and started hugging us. And I was supposed to be French expert in our group, okay? And his story, he told us that on the edge of the town, out a little bit in the woods, was a Allied air flyers POW camp. It was a POW camp when they were all like American flyers. It was like maybe Colonel Hogan, ever seen that show?
Yeah, sure.
That kind of place, okay? And he said it was ripe for, he said they really want to surrender. So we went back to our units. You know, a lot of medals, there's a question whether you should court-martial them or, because really, technically, we were AWOL, okay? Or you should court-martial and give them a medal. Anyhow, our officers, most of them were gone. We got the supply officer, our major, the G4, to authorize us going in and capturing this POW camp. And so we went out with 3 Jeeps, and he came along and a radio operator, and then the 4 of us made a raid on this POW camp.
Wow.
And if you don't mind, in my book, to save words, we got medals for this, okay? But let me read what the medal said, okay? I say, perhaps the Bronze Star Medal citation, essentially the same for all the 3 Musketeers, tells it as good as anyone. For heroic achievement in connection with military operations in Germany in April 1945, voluntarily advancing into enemy territory as a member of a 4-man patrol to liberate Allied prisoners of war with a companion, acted as a covering force, capturing and holding 6 enemy prisoner guards as hostages, while the non-commissioned officer in charge, a corporal, captured the prison commander. We had to make way he was an officer. He had only surrendered to an officer. This patrol effected the eventual surrender of 6,500 prisoners of war by ingenious bluffing. And this is why the title of my book is Ingenious Bluffing. My daughter in England insisted that that be the title. Okay, the cool courage and bravery displayed are in keeping with the finest traditions of the American combat soldier, reflecting distinct credit upon themselves and the armed services. Entered the United States Army from Boston, Massachusetts, Charleston, West Virginia, and Lubbock, Texas. So,
That's phenomenal.
okay.
Well,
How's the time going?
let's talk about this incident for a second.
Okay, good.
You got the major, the sergeant, the supply major in your
And they stayed in the Jeeps on the side of the road.
Okay, so you drive up to this, to the...
We didn't drive up to it. We drive up to the side of the road, and then had to walk through the woods.
Okay.
You know, very carefully.
Take us from there, exactly.
Okay,
What
so
happened?
then we kind of, again, there was only 4 of us. And
What weapons do you carry?
M1s. We may have had carbines at that point that we probably still. The difference, our basic weapon was the M1, which is the soldier's rifle.
Right.
NCOs had carbines, which my friend Hugh here is real expert on this, and he'll tell me later. But anyhow, that's a much lighter gun. They're all 30, I think 30 calibers. And then officers tended to have the 45 on their belts.
But you're fairly lightly armed. So.
Yeah, we were. That's what we had. Now, we did have the capability of the bayonet, okay? But anyhow, what we did, go ahead, you asked me.
Well, I want you to tell us, you're walking through the woods and you...
And then we finally got to the place, and then we kind of spread out. And then we started, this was crazy, by this ingenious bluffing, we started yelling, and it was mostly, hubba hubba was the big word in those days, okay? And we were trying to communicate to our guys inside that we were there. But it reminded me of one of the school plays we had of a battle back in Boston where they, up on Breed's Hill overlooking the Boston Harbor before they drove the British out. they got trees, they cut them down, but they pointed them out so they looked like cannons. This was the like that they had a lot of armament up there. And this was what we were doing. We were trying to give out the idea that we were a huge, big force. And we kept running and would yell for another place and another place. And then, and finally, they sent out somebody, and then the commander wanted to surrender, but only to an officer. So then at that point we commissioned Corporal Clark from Peoria, who was our beloved NCO. We really loved him. So he went in and negotiated. And then we set it up that and at a certain time the next day the surrender would officially happen. So then we went back, and then they marched in, all of us into the resort area where we were.
Wow.
Now there was also, at the same time, there must have been thousands of displaced persons that were liberated from that followed them, and they were all out in this field. But anyhow, that's what happened, okay?
So when the beloved sergeant from Peoria went in, the commandant said, I assume he said, I'd rather surrender to the Americans than the Russians.
Yeah, they
Thank God
had,
you're here.
again, that was an overriding force, was the Russians that come.
Did you ever go through the gates too?
But,
Did you go into the gates of the camp yourself?
oh yeah, I was. Yeah.
What did the camp look like?
Well, it wasn't too dissimilar from what we have seen on TV. It's little huts,
Yeah.
and then one big building that would seem to be a little grander in style, which I guess was their building.
Uh-huh.
And then these little huts were the prisoners.
With the guard towers and...
In guard towers, yeah. Yeah.
Did prisoners look like they were abused or well cared for? Or?
Well, their clothing was old and shattered, and but they most of them were pretty thin.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were pretty thin.
Were they happy to see you?
Oh, yeah, we were heroes.
Oh, you must have been.
Yeah. Anyhow, that was on that road. I mentioned that we had, the next thing I think that stands out, in the Holocaust Museum, which is now famous in Washington, they have an area accentuating our division as one of the divisions that were big in the Holocaust, and that we overran this place called Nordhausen, which was just a little further down the road, okay? Which was, actually, it was the place, I mentioned when we were up in Holland, these big bombs coming in on Antwerp, you'd hear them at nighttime. That's where these bombs were coming on. They were being built there, and the launching pads were in this place. Anyhow, we liberated that POW, not a POW, this was I'll call it a Holocaust place because they had a lot of atrocities. Now, we could not stop. We were now in kind of a peaceful thing. Our job was to go up the road and see what's up the road. So we couldn't go in. Many of our people went in and saw that place and gave evidence of the atrocities. So we just but coming down the road, again, were all of these not POWs, displaced, well, they were Polish, mostly Polish, who had been working in that area. And they came down the road, they wore almost like convict uniforms and little hats. And I'm up on my Jeep, they're coming down the side and waving at us, hundreds and hundreds.
Wow. I'm
up on my 50 caliber machine gun. So I went back to my Polish picnic days and yelled out, "No zdrowie," which means, "Our santé." I learned that at the Polish picnics. And the only words I know in Polish, I know "Na zdrowie," I know "Steady Pivo," which means 4 beers, and I use a lot of the beer. And then I know "Tak," which means yes, and "Nie," which means no, and "Dziękuję," which means thank you. And then I know "Na zdrowie do końca wojny," which is good luck until the end of the war. That's how I know. Okay? But anyhow, they were all there. They say, "Polski!"
Yeah,
And so, they took me and put me up on their shoulders. And they insisted that they escort us to the castle, and they were going to show us the wine cellars, which sounded pretty good, okay? When you're overseas, you just kind of drink anything in sight. But we couldn't stay. We had to go on. and so we did. And anyhow, we went on and we headed to a town of Hawley, H-A-L-L-E, which is in what would be the Russian zone later on, okay, Hawley. And Hawley is an old town. It's the word in Celtic for salt, okay? They have these rivers and salt mines, whatever, in that area. And anyhow, that was April the 19th. That's a very big day with the Bostonians. It's the day of the marathon and Paul Revere's ride, April 19th. And then it was also the day of the bombing in Oklahoma. It's just become a far out Patriots type day. It's called Patriots Day in Boston.
Oh.
We went into that town on the 19th. It was getting very peaceful, although we were having casualties, which was a shame because we were at the end of the war. We had guys die there. Anyhow, on April the 12th, just before that, we heard that the president had died. Okay, and then April 19th, we moved in, and then May 8th was VE Day. So we spent it. Now, the next events that I'm getting near the end was they picked us out to make liaison with the Russians. So we got all cleaned up and got in our Jeeps, and we drove maybe 30, there was a no people zone to the Tolga, to the Elbe River, E-L-B-E, and there's a town of Tolga, T-O-R-G-A-U on the other side. We commanded, okay. Anyhow, we commanded this guy with a pole and a boat to take us across, and the Russian came down dressed on a horse with all the white horse, and then there was all this toasting going on. While this was going on, one American POW came and hugged me. He had escaped and begged me to get him across the river. He wanted to get on the American side. So I said, so I got the boatman, we got in and we started to cross. And about in the middle, when suddenly all this shouting from my own people and the Russians, and the Russian captain shot his pistol off. So apparently I was violating the agreement as to the release of prisoners under the Yalta Treaty Pact. So we went on like we didn't hear them, and I brought them across, okay? All the way back to Hawley, my lieutenant, he was going to court-martial me, all this kind of stuff. I had an international crisis. By the time we got there, he said, well, for that guy, it would have been a lot of, it would have taken him months to get back home this way. So he let me off the hook. Wow. So my next experience there, in the middle of where we were living was this house, and it turned out to be a house of ill repute, a French group. And of course, as I mentioned before, I'm an alleged expert on French, so I thought I'd try out my French. So maybe about 7 o'clock, I go knock on this door and say, "Ami," which is my version of the word friend. Unfortunately, it was interpreted as MP, and bodies, half clothed, started coming out the windows. I was not too popular with our NCO group after that.
You're causing trouble all over the place.
But,
You're causing trouble all over the place.
yeah, I guess, well, in my book I say, I didn't know it at the time, but later in my career as a mental hygienist, I learned the term passive-aggressive behavior. And my definition of passive-aggressive behavior for those times was behavior that you couldn't quite court-martial somebody for. And the other was the college boys' defense against the military. But anyhow, we're now, and then the end of the war, then it was May 8th, and then one other thing was, this was Russian territory, and then at some point they started coming in horse and wagons, and there were women soldiers and men soldiers, and they're on the back of these wagons. They had chickens, live chickens, and hay and straw, and it was very apparent that they were living off of the land. And I thought, gee, how could the Russians ever stood up against us in our, quantitative logistics. Except the other thought is, the Germans didn't think they could handle it either.
Yeah.
Okay, so they come in and took it over, and then we took these 40 and 8s across the country. Jimmy and I, Tuffy realizes ambition of driving a Jeep, and he drove across back to the, we were what was called a hot division, and we were being evacuated early for the invasion of Japan. And so then, anyhow, we got back, and then back in the States, got to California, but they dropped the bomb, and the war was over. And so we got discharged.
Well, I am so happy we got this opportunity to come back and re-interview. We've never heard some of those great stories, particularly the camp liberation. I know we're running short on time, so Hugh, I want to thank you for coming back and for your service.
Okay.
It's been my pleasure.
Yes, okay. I am very honored that you let me come.